guest, LB Muñiz. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Caleb. Thanks for having me.
It's no problem. Thanks for coming on. You are the last person who was associated with the, I know it's a moment, not a movement, but the post-libertarian people. Like everyone that's in that whole group, you were the last person I've yet to have on a podcast. So I got the set. I've completed it all.
I guess I'm excited to be a collector's item.
It's gonna be fun because I really like everyone in that group. Like everyone there has been on, it's been a lot of fun. Really, besides reading Wasp and getting those red pills, and reading Burnham and getting those red pills, you guys, that entire group has been made so in my basically figuring out what books to read next.
Yeah,
all come from that group. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that would be a fun thing to explore. Well, you do a lot of if you don't mind, you do a lot of book reviews, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
it's mainly a book club podcast.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool idea. Like just as a concept, I think it's a lot of fun. And yeah, and I'm trying to do more like reviews and stuff because it's like, well, it's an excuse for it's an excuse for maybe watching more TV than I should in a day. That's kind of the way I look at it. But yeah.
I'm trying to get into writing reviews. I have a website Austriatomism, little self-plug here. Austriatomism, where I have a bunch of the Catholic writing sayings, and I'm trying to put out new book reviews for every book I read. But trying to do for the podcast and take all the same notes to try to turn it into an article is not as easy as I thought it would be.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a process. I mean, that was. I mean, I'm one of these people. I've always thought of myself as a writer, and now I feel like I can actually kind of say that. I always thought I had the chops, but like when I was in school and everything, I am still a consummate procrastinator. I've just improved a little bit, but like, it was something where like, oh yeah, I said I could write, but then I was never doing it. And it took a while. And even now, like I've realized now that it comes in waves as far as the creativity, and I love podcasting. It's very fun. And the conversations are nice because it's kind of how we're designed. But there's something extra about actually sitting down and saying, not only am I going to like try to express an idea I'm having, but I'm going to try and express it as exactly as I can get it. That the writing process really, really, it is. I think, and it's not that we don't write, because we write all day, every day. We're always typing out our thoughts and messages and things like that. But like the physical process of trying to compile ideas into a coherent piece, right? Like something that is actually meant to be consumed by a broad audience. That is, it's something that I'm still kind of shocked at how much it's helped me in other areas of just just being more diligent and working on, and just the follow through aspect and really making that a habit.
And it's something about writing. Like when you're on a podcast, if you messed up, make a mistake, it's kind of like, oh, I was in a conversation, I forgot I made a mistake. I'm not married to what I've said. And in writing, I feel like anything I write down, I'm married to that now. I have to, like, if it's good, it's good. If it's bad, I have to defend it or delete it, or make revisions to it later. Like the idea of being like, I know authors who put out books, and 20 years later, they're still like adding revisions to those same books.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be married to anything. I want to be with the outside family. I want to be able to have my work be touch and go. If I want to drop something, drop it. And then writing presents a problem there. So.
Well, and you point out that it is the case that people will like contradict them, or not even contradict. Thoughts evolve over time, right? So if you say one thing at one time, that doesn't mean you have to believe exactly that for the rest of your life, right? I mean, you can, right? There's nothing stopping you from doing that, but like it's the process. One thing I had to work on, and I've made the joke that I think college was one of the worst things for my writing career. And the reason for that isn't like, we could spend time bashing the current collegiate system, but most of the people I met were decent enough. Like I don't harbor ill will against any one professor that I had, right? But to the point is, there was something about, I think, and just school in general, but there was something about having to make something perfect so that you can get an A that for me personally was something that was like troublesome. And so like then I would procrastinate and then like do it at the last minute and get a B, and you're like, oh, okay, so at least I got a B. But like what I found is when I removed like perfection from the idea of something that I write, my stuff has typos sometimes. Like I try to edit, I try to copy edit, but I do everything myself, and just kind of being comfortable with the idea that I'm going to make mistakes, and understanding that instead of perfection, I'm working on consistency, the actual process, the actual doing of the thing. I found that to be one of the things that really helped me from a mindset perspective get in the frame to where, like, again, when I started the project, I was doing like 4 articles a week and then doing a podcast every Friday. And it was a lot of fun because there was a huge backlog of stuff that I had been meaning to talk about for a long period of time. And now I'm kind of in a stage where I'm trying to go deeper and like go back to original texts so that I can reinterpret them and like make sure that the actual theory that I'm developing theories or concepts or for tools for people to use, which is part of like the process of what I do, is making sure that those are grounded in as strong of concepts as I can make them.
I don't know about being okay with like making a mistake or being wrong. Like, one of the sayings for this podcast is, I'm going to be wrong. I don't know what I don't know. Because I started a podcast mainly because I don't know anything. I didn't like college, and I wanted to talk to smart people and learn things. And so I started the podcast. And I think maybe that's why I am so much more calm. I see a lot of people who are stressing out about things. I'm like, I don't know anything. I know I don't know anything. I'm happy with not knowing what I don't know and going from there. I see people who are like, I gotta make sure everything's exact details right. I'm like, I don't know anything.
Yeah,
like that's my starting point. I think that's comes to area, you know.
And I think that's the right starting point for people to have, and that's why I call myself a practicing skeptic, right? So I'm like, anything that I develop is developed within a frame of skepticism, which is to say that I could be wrong about something, and just and that doesn't mean I don't believe things, right? And that doesn't mean you can't believe things. It just means you realize you could be wrong, and grasping that position is something that I don't. Well, it could probably be measured in like openness from at a psychological level, right? But it's also, it's something that is like it's more natural in some people than it is in others. So like, because for other people, the idea that like foundational principles and concepts could, for the ordering of the world, could be incorrect. More importantly, the ones that you believe could be incorrect. Like, it's not called existential dread for nothing, right? Like it is the case that there's a a distribution of people who are more comfortable with these ideas than others, and I tend to resonate more with people who are open to new ideas, because that's something I like to do. I like to explore it. Like I could do like the preaching thing. And I'm not trying to disrespect like anybody who is a preacher or a priest or a reverend or anything like that, but like that's not exact. Like there's an element of that, of like trying to teach people, but again, the exploration is what drives it for me, and trying to see where it goes. So yeah,
this is a divide I've noticed, that it's really just two kinds of like libertarian, I guess, a libertarian. How to put this? You in that liberty space, you're in the liberty circle. You're either a scholar type, in which case you just want to demagogue and be right and teach, which definitely I think is good thing for that. And then there's I would say the more philosopher type, which is having to explore ideas. Like I would put everyone in Muñiz Institute as a scholar type, and they're great at it. I love everybody there. And I would put you guys in the post-libertarian area moment, more like the philosopher type. Like you don't know everything. You're gonna try to explore ideas and go from there. I think that's really a divide, is the scholar types and the philosopher types, and both have value, but trying to figure out which one you want to do and which one you want to have to go down the path is I think an important thing to figure out.
Yeah. Like and what I love about the Mises Institute is their dedication to teaching, right? The reality is that in a marketplace, there's going to be a place for both of those things. Like I don't know, I call what I do sense making, because because it's too presumptuous to call myself a philosopher. And because it's not exactly philosophy. Sometimes I do philosophy, but most of the time I'm doing news analysis. I don't, but I won't pretend to not enjoy doing both of them. So I've just always had the interest in politics, really. Exactly. And that's yeah.
I want to get to that. Exactly. What sense making? I like the idea. What exactly do you mean when you say you're in business like sense making?
So I first heard the term from either Brett or Eric Weinstein when the intellectual dark web was kind of becoming something of a, approaching a phenomenon. And I had never come in contact with like that. I like understood the idea of what a sense is, right? Your 5 senses. I understood the idea of making something, and I understood that if we're talking about sense making, we're talking about like having things make makes sense, right? Like making sure that they cohere in such a way that we can understand an idea, a concept, or a principle. But so then I find so I hear them talking about it, and they were always talking about it in terms of our sense making apparatuses are undefined. So the sense making apparatus is any media outlet. Like I take in the raw information from the news cycle and I give it a perspective and I give it a narrative effect that helps you understand it better. Because there is like, because as a, like in the philosophical sense, I'm really interested in the subjectivity of like existence. But like, which is to say, like, what is the minute differences between how you and I perceive the same physical object? Like right now, you and I are both looking at a screen. We're both looking at a camera. We're both looking at each other or ourselves, as the case may be. Like, but like, we're also not looking at the exact same things, and we're definitely in different places. So there's so it comes from that standpoint of trying to realize that. So a sense making apparatus is something that takes all that information and tried to turn it into something that you can consume to understand the world around you, whether that is your immediate world or perhaps the larger world that you have no interaction with to begin with. And so what I try to do at beenawake.com is better sense making. I'm trying to make better sense of things like of mostly like the news cycle and so there's like media critiques that go into that of how stories are covered. But so that's like the process that I try to do over there, and it's something that I've just been doing for a while, and I think it's helpful, and it's for me, I like the teaching aspect of it too. So I enjoy kind of like trying to say, okay, there's these intuitions I have, and like let me actually make this into something that I think people could use.
I like that. That makes sense to me. You mentioned the IDW in that. Like, what's your take? I have some. The IDW is basically what got me into like. Besides Ben Shapiro, got me deep into like philosophy and that kind of stuff. And even though I critique a lot of them now loosely, like I did a time podcast yesterday on this on Brett and Eric Weinstein. So, I do like Brett. Like I think out of all the IDW people, Brett is the best one. That's exactly. Of all the IDW people, which one do you think is like the best one? What's the most cleanse one? That's really just
the best
kinds.
The best and the worst.
More best and worst. But best and worst would do.
Well, so, I mean, I guess it depends on who you kind of include in that. But I think that first network effect, where like the Weinstein brothers, Heather Hine, Brett's wife, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris, Dave Rubin, and I think that covers it pretty well. And so I'm personally, and I almost feel bad saying this because I can't even say I have a good enough sample size, but like what I've listened to from Sam Harris just doesn't do it for me. And I have one of my closest friends is a big fan of Sam Harris. I know a few people who are like really, really into him that I'm friends with. It's just for me, specifically the politics aspect of it, but also his insistence upon truth being this cold, heartless thing. It just in general, I have always taken, before there was a Jordan Peterson position, I was always kind of in that. I was always kind of heading in that direction with the way that I was interpreting the world. He kind of like came to the fore and was like, oh yeah, here actually is this way of culminating. Because I always thought Jung was cool. I never read much of him, but I was reading a lot of Nietzsche around the time that Jordan Peterson like released his Bill C-16 video. I look at, a lot of times we kind of gamify. A lot of times we gamify these situations, or I don't know what the right word is, but there's this thing of like, well, it's the political angle, I suppose, of like what side do you end up being on, and while there is certainly a place for that, I also try to look at people in terms of what I can learn from them, and there's really no sides in that situation. And then you would also include like Peter Boghossian, James Lindsay, Heather Pluckrose as well, probably in that IDW group that came along pretty soon thereafter. So I guess if it was best and worst, it would kind of be Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. Certainly, I'd say like I wouldn't even say I'm familiar enough with what Sam Harris is producing now to like want to comment publicly in a disrespectful way. But suffice it to say, like what I've seen, I haven't loved in a lot of the stuff. but yeah, and then I was a huge Jordan Peterson fan, and I still am. I mean, I think that while I don't agree with his more recent takes post lockdowns, that also is kind of the reason why I wrote like the post libertarian moment to find, and why I started writing again, writing at beenawake.com and doing a podcast again, is because like, no, it's different. Like, this was an inflection point. This is something that is going to change the future. And frankly, he strikes me as somebody who, as I detail in the essay, but is like living in a moment, right? I don't think I like it's I don't think we're going to I don't think the decade, not to be too predictive, but I don't think the decade will see the nation state survive. Like the nation state won't survive the next decade. I maybe some will, right? But it won't be the nation state model that was established after World War One, right? We might say, and like solidified in World War II. So basically, America's rise to the top of the heap. That's not going to be what the world looks like when 2030 comes. And I think, and the scary thing is now that doesn't sound crazy, because that's something myself, and I know a lot of people, but myself in particular, has been talking about for like 5, almost 10 years. You know, it is not this idea in particular, but when I did my first project, I was specifically saying that a collapse was going to come. And what mattered in that moment was what ideas were there to fill it. And I think we're even closer to that kind of a thing. You could argue we're already past the inflection, like the beginning of it. And so that's why it matters, the ideas and the way that we're talking about it. And that relates to libertarians, that relates to I mean, like, politics is something you're going to have to worry about now, because they're going after your bank account if you have the wrong politics. We are not far away from that position, and like, that's a serious thing. And so to pretend that an anti-politics position, right, and again, this is a position that I've held for a long time, to pretend that is like something you can hold on to right now, I think is foolish. And I think the people who are more likely to do that are people for whom the system is working out for well currently, right? And like, you know, and then in the case of somebody like Jordan Peterson, he still gets to go and make his tour, right? A lot of people have complained about the fact that he's going to perform in cities that I don't know this for sure, but I've seen reports of it, where there are going to be some kind of passport mandates, that there is going to be an internal passport, and having something like that in the United States is just wrong, you know?
Absolutely. No, it's I think you're right. I think we're past the click. You know, we're past the, now it's just waiting for it to happen. You know, trying to do what we can anyway. Like, I'm working on my first major piece. It's about stoicism and riding the wave and that kind of thing. When the Titans go Saints, it's made a lot of fun. But anyway, that's for a later conversation. Like, you're 100% right. Like, the idea that we can just abandon politics right now, I don't think. I think we should abandon federal politics in a sense. I think that's like a more of a waste of time. But when I got talking with an agorist friend of mine, and he was saying that you should be building up the community. I'm like, what do you think I'm doing? I'm trying to get local laws appeared. I'm trying to get local cities better so people can do things more freely here and create a local city state that is going to survive things. Like, I'm doing what you say I'm doing. I'm just working with the existing infrastructure instead of, you know, taking over bigger new infrastructure. And he's like, okay, that makes sense. That actually works. He was a sensible agorist, which not many of those. I love Jose. I love a lot of the agorists, but someone in my Twitter, I have a policy on Twitter. If you have an autistic response to a tweet, I block you, and I block majority of agorists because they're so autistically bound to their principles. They respond really dumbly to tweets, and it's just like, that's not what's been around.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's just what ideological possession or a more dogmatic approach to the world looks like, you know. And in some instances, it's worthwhile. It's a worthwhile perspective. But to your point, is like, what does it actually mean to build community, right? And you can kind of do both. Yeah, I just don't think that there's any. I don't think that there's any time for that. If you want to operate completely outside of like, quote unquote, the system, more power to you. I just take exception to the idea of an anti-politics position, or the idea that, like, or the morality that school of thought offers. I've never enjoyed it. I don't think it's I just don't get it. I guess I think morality is left for elsewhere and not the realm of legality,
Yeah,
right?
makes sense. You've mentioned the responsibility of the microphone on a podcast. Can you go into a little bit more? That idea sounds interesting.
Yeah, it was, I sometimes, like, honestly, sometimes things just come to me in the moment and it sounds good. But it's something that I'm meaning to say. So, like, there's other formulations, right? Like the magic of the microphone, the power of the microphone. And in the moment, this was on my recent appearance on Counterflow, I just kind of said like the responsibility of the microphone. In particular, what I mean by that is like when I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm not just like venting, because that would be easy. Like venting is not a difficult thing to do as it relates to politics, and in fact, that like venting aspect of political analysis, there's a place for it. And I should maybe make one qualifier, which is say I will sometimes do that on Twitter, but when I'm writing and when I'm trying, and like usually I try to be funny or have like a play on words, and I don't stop at just getting angry at a question, at a story, at something that happens. So really, like, so what the responsibility of the microphone means to me is that when I'm putting out content, I am trying to speak carefully, right? Now, does that mean every time I'm on a microphone that I am like doing that? No, right? Like sometimes I might be doing something that's more casual, trying to have, just having fun with somebody. It's not like I don't like to have, like to shoot the breeze with people. Small talk is great. It's not, so it was just in the moment, it was just kind of the idea of like what we do as podcasters, or like what are you doing with your show, right? Like if you're doing a book review, like, make sure that you've actually read it, right? Or at least read enough of it to have a good opinion on it.
There's a few episodes where you can't tell why I skimmed the book.
Yeah,
I have this episode. I look at it, I'm like, let's lift a bet on that one.
Yeah, and so there's just, it's the idea of like I think I'm putting out a product that's good enough for people to consume over at binawake.com, and it's something that I take seriously, and so I take it on as a responsibility. So that's kind of what I meant by that term, and what I mean when I'm talking about like responsibility in the context.
I think it was you know podcast you on, but you mentioned you recently read not recently, I don't know when the podcast came out, but Brett Weinstein and his wife's new book, what do you think of it? 'Cause I'm thinking about picking it up.
I'd highly recommend it. I've had an interest in evolutionary biology ever since I heard Walter Block talking about it, and like when I was watching essays and lectures of his back in, that would have been 2012, 2013, was when I probably was like watching a lot of that stuff. So I'd heard about like evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, and really just, as all these different things happen, you also see like Gad Saad, again, Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, Heather Hine, and others who were using this lens, this method by which you could view the world. And it really speaks to me and I found it to be really interesting. So much so, frankly, that like I used to take a far less biological viewpoint. Like this is like one of those pieces that I've been meaning to write. But like, when people would bring up a study that was done on rats of like how they found X behavior or Y behavior. And I would say like, yeah, but we're not rats. And I could defend that position well enough, right? It's not that you can defend that position rhetorically. And I feel really silly for making arguments like that now. Not to say I ever was like rude or even like dismiss the entire point. I would just always want to get it in there of like how we're a little bit different than rats. And probably because I didn't really understand like biological implications or thinking about that on an evolutionary scale. So I thought the book was really, really good. I mean, there's a couple of concepts that I want to cover on Been Awake that they talk about, but one of the big ones is they list the conditions for something to be an adaptive behavior, and I'm not even going to try to remember them, but there's 4 of them, and just those little toolkits that they put in really does help expand and give you a means of analysis that is that is scientific, right, and is rational, but also is, I think, truthfully, in concert with deeper, like what might have been referred to as like religious truths. Like the bifurcation between religions and science that we've all kind of grown up with has never completely made sense to me. And I think
doesn't make sense to me either.
Yeah, and that's, and not to say, and I'm not a particularly religious person at the moment, but but to the point is, I never, the way people talk about it, I find it difficult to interact with sometimes now, because I just I don't understand the separation between it.
So my patron saint Aquinas, and his whole thing is about science and different kinds of truths. And so, no, the reason I want to read the book is I'm looking for any way, and any way I can look at people's actions and try to draw conclusions from their actions. So I love praxeology. Anything they can offer me a new system of analysis when dissecting what's happening, I'm all for. And so I hear Brett Weinstein do it on a podcast. I'm like, this is when he's at his best, And so if I can read a book and kind of get some of those ideas and maybe apply that, actually, anyway, looking at what's happening, trying to dissect from different starting points is a lot of fun. It's all in your head, all Ivy Tower stuff. People would say it was time, but I think it's a lot of fun. I think it has practical use, but I've definitely added this to my list. When I'm done with it, would you be willing to come on for a book club?
Sure. Yeah, I could redo some of the stuff. I was going to cover a little bit of that, so for sure, I could do that.
This is my with every guest I've had. I think is I've got them to talk about a book and then got to come back on for a book about it.
I think that's a great idea, and I actually did read this one cover to cover, so it would be, I would just have to refer to my copious notes that I take when I read. Not even that copious. I just do a lot of highlighting.
Wonderful. It's on Audible now. I'm gonna get my next clear. I'm gonna be picking it up. And,
yeah, I did a mix of Audible and then like reading it. That's kind of what I do now. If I really, really want a book, I just buy them both, and then if I finish it, I buy the physical copy.
I've done that.
So that I have one on the shelf just for show and to have.
I got that. Mm-hmm. Like it is. There's a few books I have that physical copies that I can't find good audio copies for. Like I found for like Ethics of Money Production by Rita George. Not even trying to pronounce his name, Huseman. And it's a good book's way trying to find an audio version of it. I found a guy with a speech impediment worse than mine reading it, and it's like, okay, it's not an audio book. It's just a guy. He's literally stuttering with every word, and so it's not. Who's even uploading it, I guess, but. So you mentioned the pre-Socratics a few times on our podcast. You mentioned when did people's historical time start? Like when history began. Mine started the death of Socrates, and I started there. I was like, you see, the only people I know who actually started kind of before that was the pre-Socratics. So what can you tell me about the pre-Socratics? I know nothing.
So there was a few of them. They said stuff before Socrates, and no. So like this was a course that I took, about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. There's a few in particular that like Parmenides stuck out to me. Parmenides was close to a contemporary of at least Plato, because Plato has a response to Parmenides. That's one of his, that's one of his books. So he has Socrates interacting with or responding to Parmenides. There was also like the early Adam, like the first forms of atomism were developed, were at least started at that point in time. This is generally speaking, as far as I understand it, just a period in like Hellenistic Greece, like directly but after the time of Troy, maybe like after the time of the Odyssey. That's what I was trying to say. Like after the time of the Odyssey of the Mythic, but before, as you were kind of pointing out, when like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle came about. So they're basically like early forms of what would be called Western philosophy. And so in particular, there's like Zeno's paradoxes. That's another one. Heraclitus, I think, is the one. There's a few that kind of stick out to me. Like I said, the Parmenides is one that I've written that I would actually like write about, and just really a couple of the ideas that were from it, because Parmenides was one of the first people who his work is where we get the formulation of man as the measure for all things, which again goes back to that subjectivity of the world. So his point was like truth is whatever somebody says it is, or not exactly that, but like what reality is what you perceive it to be, and if it's different than somebody else, that that just means they're different. Whereas like Plato brought us to the forms, so it's like, no, even if there's a different perception between you or I, you could then there's this perfect representation of the thing in itself that exists, and what we perceive as reality is like trying to reflect that. I've brought that up a lot just to talk about, because I love pointing out how humanity is, we still have, like, we've gotten really complex, but there are some things that we still haven't figured out. And there are some, and in fact, we've in many ways been having the same, like, similar kinds of conversations in different ages at different times in different ways. This is one of the reasons why I think of myself as like a skeptic, is because, you know, you look at all that and basically I looked at the world around me, and I noticed that everybody said that they had the truth, but that truth didn't cohere. So there wasn't one perfect thing. So I brought them up, you know, not because I'm like a particular expert in it. There's a few key insights that I like to draw upon from when I read that, but because it's worth looking at this time before we even say philosophy was a thing, to see that people were still trying to like figure this out, right? So like there were like Zeno's paradoxes, which was kind of like before there was even a computer or a camera, somebody was talking about how if you shot an arrow across a stadium, that
half the distance, right?
That what?
You kept halving the distance between the arrow and the target.
Yes, that's one of them. And then the other one is that, like, if you were to just freeze the arrow at each point in its journey, it would never look like it's moving, because it would basically just appear. But yeah, your point is the half the distance thing as well. And so when do you actually like arrive? So just again, there were these that human beings have been like fascinated and trying to figure these things out for as long as we've been a species. And I think that's really cool. I think that's something that we can share in for humanity. And I think that the fact that we don't see that as represented in a world with our technological advancement is just a symptom of the rot that exists within the governing structures.
I agree with that. Now, there's a podcast I'm listening to, Concord and Tielis, the two Catholic guys, and they read books, and it's a real good podcast. And they recently did a Diamone, I think. I can't pronounce it, but it's in Greek, but it's an early Aristotle book. And he kind of, Aristotle is summing up different views of like science and the senses and how the brain works. And I think they put out, like, Aristotle was talking about these things, and they point out people who were debating those topics, and we're still debating these topics today with this new frame and new with bigger words, pretty much.
Yeah.
So definitely interesting. So I don't want to get too personal here, but you've mentioned a lot of people in the kind of post-libertarian moment are very either religious or finding religion.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned you're not currently super religious, but would you be? You also mentioned you're a skeptic. Like, religiously, where would you, if you had to place yourself, where would you place yourself?
I'm not a very good Catholic.
I think every Catholic.
No, I was I mean, I Jack Posobiec once said on like Tim Pool or something that like saying you were raised Catholic is the same thing as you're saying you're not. And I kind of agree with him when he says that. So like, I'm just not a good one. I mean, insofar as like God is concerned, I've never considered myself an atheist. I'm maybe just not like I said, I'm not religiously observant right now, but I've always loved conversations about these kinds of ideas. So, you know, I think the reality is I'm somebody who struggles with his faith, and I don't have any, and I don't really have any shame in saying that, because I kind of know that that's like, that's just a real thing that a lot of people have. Right. And it's always interesting because it is one of those situations where I'm like, I'm not religious enough for the religious people, and I'm not atheist or secular enough for the atheist secularists. So that's where the skepticism again comes in. I wrote in a song once that like those on top of the fence are just as likely to be shot by their allies as the ones they might not yet despise. And it's like, you know, like being a fence sitter. And the thing I said in the song was like, so being uncaring and choose a side. You kind of have to choose a side, because if you stand in the middle, you might get shot, especially if there are bullets flying. And I think unfortunately we're in times like that. So yeah, I don't pretend to be like a theologian, right? Like what I do is closer to philosophy, as we said. But I don't look at like philosophy as being at odds with religion per se. Like Socrates wasn't questioning the gods. He was just put to death for that. Yeah. Right. Like Socrates was questioning the power structures in Athens and finding out that they didn't really know what they were talking about. And so, you know, he had the youths questioning the gods, right? Like that's what he was put to death for. and really understanding that story is I think vital to Western civilization. So that's it's I
This is
yeah.
a great book by Arthur Herman called The Cave in the Light. History of Aristotle versus Plato throughout history. It's a great book.
Mhm.
And he basically starts it with Socrates' death. I guess where he begins it. That's like I think it was Peter Creed who said Western civilization is defined by the death of two men, Jesus and Socrates. And I think that's a fair quote. That's like that is the defining moment that's like Western civilization.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And to the extent of like, if you were to ask me three people that have profoundly influenced me, it would, and this may seem presumptuous, but for me, it's Socrates, Jesus, and Nietzsche. Like those, if you want to like, if you really, if I was trying to distill it down into three people, it's those three things. And yeah, there's a lot of dissonance in there. And hey, so hopefully it's something that's worth consuming, that's entertaining. And if you think so, make sure you subscribe at beenawake.com.
Good self-promotion right there. I've never read Nietzsche. I tried when I was like, let's see, 17. When I was 17, I wanted to read philosophy. I picked up Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche.
Okay.
Didn't understand any of it, put them back down, and been tested for a year. And I still could not get myself to properly read Beyond Good and Evil. Like I've tried again, like maybe 2 years ago. I still cannot. I don't know. Maybe I'm not getting it, but like, what do you find interesting in Nietzsche and that appealing in Nietzsche?
So, well, the book I read some of Twilight of the Idols, but if I'm being honest, I didn't retain that much of it. It wasn't a very just because there was, I don't even remember why. I think I just wasn't going to class. But the one that really stuck with me is the gay science, La Gaia Scientia, or De Fröhliche Wissenschaft, which would be the German. And so the gay science means like the happy way of living life, was at least the way it was taught to me. So what I found reading Nietzsche was stuff that I thought made a lot of sense compared to somebody like an Immanuel Kant. Like there was always this part of me reading Kant that was kind of like, okay, like, okay, I guess, like this is all very logical. It's all very well laid out, but like, his whole thing of like Kant's whole thing about like the only moral thing is the thing that you do for the sake in and of itself, and that you don't actually like be rewarded from it, or at least that's my understanding of what his position is for like what is like when something is moral. I found just to be so much work, and not work from the standpoint of like you need to do things for that. It's like, well, frankly, I always was more partial to the Randian or the general egoist formulation of like self-interest is a mutually beneficial thing. And of course, if we look at something like, I think, evolutionary biology, we're much closer to an egoist perspective, perhaps. I don't want to say that really because like because like the egoists aren't exactly right, especially like the acolytes of Rand.
I like to say psychological egotism, and like I think that's what the people who got like, evolutionary sense say everything we've done is born out of selflessness, and that's why we are geared towards that. I think that is a better. I can work into a Catholic framework. They original sin, therefore we're selfish. We got to rise above our base instincts. Human beings are psychological egotists. That's why That's why I think a lot of brand stuff makes sense to people who are of that mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's right. That's the same.
Yeah, and so what I found in Nietzsche was just a really powerful way of analyzing. In fact, like one that I will say, like when I read it, I wasn't in some respects, I don't even think I was prepared for it. You know what I mean? I was just able to download the information, because frankly, it's one of those things of something will be happening, I'll be watching something, I'm like, oh, that's what he was talking about in that part. And so just the idea of the death of God, that was the one thing. That was one of the things where it's like, so you realize, so you hear growing up, if you grow up in like a religious household, like God is dead, right? You'll have like seen that, whether it's in like a Christian movie that's, saying that that's the bad guy, or maybe some reference in pop culture, or like, graffitied or something like that. And like and in fact, I even heard that from professors before I read Nietzsche about how like, this is one of the big things that he said, but that's not what Nietzsche says. What Nietzsche says is God is dead and we have killed him. It's a completely different, right? And so it's, and again, those are like the parts. That's what fascinates me about like the exploration of ideas, is really trying to get inside of those types of things. And what I would maybe say now is I think what Nietzsche grasped then is far more apparent today in terms of the herd of humanity and the idea that like the will of the whole is something that can be, if not completely constructed, molded and diverted in one direction or another. And him capturing that insofar as how the church used it to influence people, and how, but like, and how like that was good and like the good aspects, but then the bad aspects of it. In particular, he hits. It's funny because you read Nietzsche and he talks about the asceticism of the church, right? Like the fact that they go without and they encourage people to be poor, right? Those, blessed are the poor in spirit, or like, and like, but like in a physical sense because of the the idea of like you should go without. And it's funny reading that because like that's not really I don't think that's really the Christianity of today. And maybe in fact it's not that, because just the world changed so much with the Industrial Revolution. So I've written a few of the other ones, like big insights I've written about. A couple of them is also the like the power of laughter, and just that inevitably the moralizers of every age will be chased away by laughter, because there's just this eternal wave. There's an eternal ebb and flow to existence. And and so like what matters then is how you position yourself to kind of like ride that wave. That's really how I look at being in a sense. And sometimes you can get farther than others and blah blah blah, but I think there's always an element of that. So those are some of the insights I'd say from Nietzsche. But yeah, the Gay Science is what I read, which is like supposed to be a very good breath of his thought. I think Beyond Good and Evil was later in his career, but I could be wrong about that. But that's one that I do need to pick up and read more, because I think that's where he actually gets into the will of power more so than he does in the Gay Science.
And there's a lot of philosophers who I have noticed that you read their work and you don't get it. You catch it later, and you see people who talk about the work like, that's what you got from that? That's not what I got from that. And it makes you wonder, like, how much is their work, how much, outside, like I say, the Aristotelian Thomas school, because they are very, very plain and they have exactly what they want to say. A lot of other philosophers I feel like you have to read into. And so I think that's fine. I think there's positives in that. But it's something I didn't notice. I'm only ever read like Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Not trying to read other philosophers. I'm like, why can't this just be plain? Like reading Foucault, it's all flowery language and it's all beautiful. And I'm like, this is great. I don't know what he's saying, but it's great. I just trying to get past that and trying to actually read it and try to understand it. It's someone who's like an Aristotelian mind is having people have a hard time with, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to say to that. One is you're entirely right. It happens to everybody, and there's a few reasons for why. One of the reasons is that a good philosophy is supposed to try and change the way you view the world, right? Because it's thinking about something, and it's trying to get every single aspect of that out. And so, to the extent that that's like I said, reading Kant for me was always very convoluted, because for me it didn't really comport to the world that I saw, or I thought it was like too much at times. And again, I'm a Kant scholar, could probably dismantle me and explain why he's the best philosopher ever. That's not really what I'm driving at here. But as it relates to the complicated way in which people write in the past, that's something I've been thinking about, because it was something that I changed at the beginning and I was really working on, and I continually work on, is trying not to have a really heavy prose. Where it's required, I do it, but I also try to write in a more popular style that more people can identify with today. And I think there's a lot of hot air in the conversation about people's attention spans and all that stuff. But it is fair to say that, most people have a very surface level opinion of most things, right? Because most people haven't spent the time to go through and study most things. This is the epistemic humility that I think flows from a skeptical position, and why you can kind of then start to recognize patterns in people. So but one pattern is the fact that a lot of stuff in the olden times is still pretty complex, even when they've tried to reinterpret it, right? Like the Bible, the New International Version of the Bible, I just can't read. I grew up on the New American Standard, so it's always really, really strange. And it is difficult to get that kind of translation, but it is, again, going back to what we were talking about of like that ebb and flow of history, it's worth pointing out because like the best minds that humanity has had to offer are still difficult to read in 2022, right? Like it's still tough to get through Hegel. Some of that is his prose for sure, right? Like Bob Murphy reinterpreted human action and it's a lot thinner, right? And so, but then you have to say, well, what was it about the people then that had the attention span to be able to consume 1,000-page treatises? That's why I talk about things in terms of like media and consumption and where those differences lie between like the podcasting and between the writing, or like, you know, reading a book or writing an article. And at least for me, that's why I focus on shorter stuff now. And I like working on longer things, but they take more time.
That makes sense. That makes sense. It's a weird thing I noticed. I was reading the Summa Theologica by Aquinas, and someone told me, it's like, you know, he wrote that for like high school students. Like he wrote that to be a high school, like a basic theology for high school students. I'm like, don't make me feel dumb. I feel smart. I'm reading books that have Latin in it, and he just came by and just shot me down.
Yeah, but you know, but you also then have to take into account that like high school then was like, it was like probably closer to what we consider to be like the extended adolescence of like modern humanity. When you read the Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, like this extended adolescence in weird cultures like Western Enlightenment, individualist, developed something or the other. It's like that's or something. That's the weird acronym. But basically like these the hyper novelty of our age, this extended adolescence is something that like, yeah, it's a problem. You know, and I think we're starting to see we're really starting to see the ramifications of that, coupled with something like social media.
No, it's just like I have friends who are probably gonna be staying with their parents until about 25, maybe 30, and it's like it's not that they don't want to leave, not that they can't afford to leave. Not getting lots of roommates. It's like people are going to be stuck at home longer. People are going to be maturing over a longer period of time. It's not going to be like you're 18, you're an adult now. Now it's like, no, you're 27, now you're an adult. Like I just see it going down that route. I feel like a joke that my only guy I know who moved out of his parents' house has 3 roommates, and they're all also couples. And so I made a joke that we're reinventing multi-generation households among friends.
Wait. 3 couples living in one house?
Yeah. So 2 of them,
two couples, can I
one
pry?
guy.
How many kitchens and bathrooms?
1 kitchen, 2 baths.
You're kidding me.
No, 2 couples. One guy is
what part of the country?
Florida.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And it's like they can afford a house, which is near.
What part of Florida?
Central Florida.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's nuts though, because it's kind of like you see all these people, and it's like, wow, we're gonna reinvent multi-generational family households, but through friend groups, which is honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to that. Like I wouldn't be opposed to the idea of bringing back bigger family households and reinventing the family as a friend group. I think that would be progress away from what we have now, but still, it's something that we're gonna see how that changes going forward. It's gonna be interesting to watch.
You know, what you're really driving at here is such an interesting conversation about like how familial ties are cut. You know, like I stayed living with my dad longer than I would have wanted to under, you know, if I could afford it to move out, I would have, not because I don't like my dad, but because I wanted to be on my own and be more independent. But you know, with like the student debt and for the same kind of thing, it's a matter of affording it. And you know, you could get into reasons for that, right? Like of the fact that basically the government has said, and like the boomer generation believes that that real estate must be an always appreciating asset, has made it so that like the bust never came that should have come in the housing market. And you know, somebody like Stefan Molyneux will also point out how when you have a constant wave of immigration, that also holds housing prices up as well, such that you do have to have 3 couples living in a single house. I mean, I'm thankful enough to where I have my own space, but I'm in a split level, so I'm in like garden level, and then there's an upstairs. There's 2 floors above me. Thankfully, it's family above me, so you know we get along well. But we wouldn't get along well if I didn't have my own kitchen, and not for my sake, but for their sake, because I can be a little messy sometimes, and you know, and same thing with the bathroom stuff, right? There's What's interesting is how much we've lost in terms of those like previous heretofore very like conscious bonds that people would get and keep. cross-generationally speaking. I guess thankfully my grandparents emigrated here. And then and then my dad's side, who had been here for a while, like there's still would see my extended family on a pretty regular basis. But that's changed over the years. But I guess, for some people, like I said, I was raised Catholic. There were 8 brothers and sisters to see, and like each of them had 5 or 6 to 7 to 8 kids, and a lot of them have like 8 kids now too. So it's like, so there's so it had that there was the cultural reinforcement in that respect. I think that probably came from something like that. Man, it is something that I wouldn't say that we've lost, because I haven't lost it per se, but I feel bad when I realize that for some people it is, right? And it's and there's like that dual tension aspect of it too, because it's like, okay, so stay with your parents for longer, but then like, even if you do that, like the culture still set, even though that's maybe the most feasible thing and historically speaking was the thing you would do given the context, like still the culture reacts negatively against that. And, in the context of like dating or something, perhaps for good reason, right? It's, so it's an interesting little tightrope.
It's, similar going, I have friends who are very Latin. They're from Venezuela. The daughters will not be leaving the house until they have, basically they're going to bring husbands in. That's family's plan. They're going to bring husbands into the family.
Yep.
And I have other people I know who are like, when my kids are 18, kick them out of the house. And I'm like, you make yourself homeless. I mean, that's what you're going to be doing now. It's very, how to put it, Scott Hahn wrote a great book called The First Society. It's all about the destruction of the sacrament of marriage has led to the atomism in the individual. And it's he goes through like how family structure used to be. You wouldn't go hire a nanny, you rely on your grandparents. We've moved away from relying on family, relying on everyone else, and now we just atomize the individual to where it's no longer like you don't rely on family, you don't trust your family, you don't want to be with the family. And that is replaced the fundamental unit of society as a family to the individual, and the individual is easy to trust in the family. So it's
I think a few years ago I would have had more to say against that position. and I really see I think I see that side of the coin more. I think where it gets muddy is the degree to which people conflate, because I think you said the proper term, when people conflate atomism with individualism. Because I don't think individualism is incompatible with like a holistic view of humanity, including the fact that we're social creatures. And in that I hang the hat on Mises. It's completely, like, theoretically speaking, it's completely copacetic. Like it coheres. So like, but what's interesting, or not what's interesting, what's terrifying is the way that atomistic tendency is exemplified by the government. Right, in terms of like, this is the age-old welfare question, but less so the government, is the way that is perhaps the degree to which people were and are so willing to outsource these sorts of tasks and duties and responsibilities. And it's, what starts a little bit what starts as a little drip of water will eventually wear through a boulder, right? This is a truism of physics, right? Like erosion's gonna, I don't know if physics is the right word. Erosion is gonna happen over time, is what I'm trying to say. And I think one of the things we're dealing with, going back to the ebb and flow, is like we've been edging away, we've been eroding away these basic structures of how humans have conceptualized. Remember the inherent subjectivity to existence that we kind of started talking about, right? But like, we human beings have been that we've been pushed and farther away by much of the powers that be from those basic categorizations, such to the point of now I have to have a conversation about not even whether CRT is real, but what, there's a legit, there are plenty of smart people out there who will make the case that CRT is a boogeyman of the right. Right. Salon just ran their hit piece on James Lindsay just the other day. And for every person who's getting mad at James Lindsay, I'm not saying he's an angel, because of course I wouldn't say something like that. Like I said, it's about what can you get from people, not on what side are they on. For better or worse, salon.com is saying he's on the right, so pay attention to that. As far as those of us who find ourselves, just saying like, yeah, okay, that's what I am, is not, I'm not a leftist, so that means I'm on the right. And you know, and my opinions matter too. And I have certain way, and you know, and you're kind of, part of this is because we've eroded so much of those, like, because maybe you might say the chaotic left has eroded away at these basic categorizations, right? Like the entire conception of queer theory, something that's been active, something that people will go and get. Like, I don't have a PhD next to my name. Let me be completely clear. I don't even have a BA next to my name. Okay. I have an AGS. That's what I got next to my name if I was going to sign up to it. So you can take it for what it's worth. But people will go out there and get a PhD in something like queer theory. And what queer theory purports to do is tear away the basic categorizations by which we conceptualize the world, because they consider those to be oppressive. Like, and we're not talking about college classrooms. We're talking about elementary school.
Yeah.
So don't pretend that, and we're past the point now where we can pretend that these sorts of things aren't going to have negative consequences at a cultural and societal level as we scale upwards through society. Do you really look at the Western world as it exists right now, and do you say that it is in a state of flourishing? Of course not, right? You know, like, we've got it good. We've got it better than most people throughout our history. That's one of the reasons why it hasn't gotten that bad. But, you know, I don't know.
You know, it's like you hear the have outsourcing things. Like I saw an article. I can't remember where I saw it, but a woman was like, she felt guilty about leaving the kid in public school and going back to work. And the article was like going over how that's a anti-feminist mindset. And I was like, you're destroying things. Like they want to destroy the family. They openly try to destroy the family. And these articles where it's like you should shaming women for feeling guilty about leaving their kids with strangers all day. It's weird. It's unnatural, and it's so I just know the time. I'm sorry, I wrap this up real quick. Actually, I just know the time it was. LB, where people find you at?
You can find me on all social media at the LB Muñiz, and of course, please go to beenawake.com. Subscribe with your email address. I have more premium content that I'm going to start releasing on a regular basis. So make sure you're signed up. You're going to get free previews of that stuff if you're on the free list, just to kind of, you know, actually provide value for people who want to maybe help me make this something that I can dedicate even more time to as far as research goes. So beenawake.com at the LB Muñiz.
Wonderful. Well, sorry to want to sort everybody, but we went for an hour, and I have 4 other podcasts this week. I got to get back to prepping for them as well. So, LB, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute blast. Everyone listening, go read some more books.